I am pleased to deliver the second lecture in the series of lectures on Bhagavad-Gita, Theory and Practice of Management, a contemporary profile sponsored by the three celebrated institutions, namely National Institute of Vedic Science, Yoga Sanskritam University, Florida, USA, and Sri Prasanna Venkata Research Foundation, Bangalore. I recall that I mentioned that all the Puranas, Vedas, Upanishads, and including Bhagavad-Gita have different dimensions of meanings. As Madhvacharya has narrated, the dimensions are Adi Bhautika, Adi Daivika, and Adhyatmika. I gave the example of Agni. Agni, Adi Bhautika is fire, as we see in everyday life. And Adi Daivika is Agni Devata. And Adhyatmika is Agnyantargata Paramatma, one who gives that capability to Agni. So in that light, Bhagavad-Gita, interpreted in the modern perspective, provides to us a lot of insight on theory and practice of management. There too, managing oneself. In the Western science of management, Peter Drucker and company, we often get the theory and practice of managing others, managing the raw materials, managing the capital, managing the government, managing the policy makers, managing the banks, managing the labor, and managing among themselves. But it does not give the focus on managing oneself. Unless we manage ourselves in the proper perspective, we will not have the capability to manage others. In this light, Bhagavad-Gita is very unique. Now, just to give some more examples of how the Adhyatmic interpretation of the different characters of the Puranas enables us to understand the messages of the Puranas in the proper perspective. As I mentioned, there is a famous saying from one of the Acharyas that Itihasa Puranabhyam Vedam Samupabrihayet. To understand the meanings of the Vedas, the philosophical tenets, the philosophical messages of Vedas, we must use the Itihasas and Puranas. Itihasas and Puranas should not be regarded as mere histories, statements of the fights between the kings, brothers, or stories of dynasties, their warfare, their sons and daughters, and all the relationships. No. They have got a certain deeper messages of the philosophy of life. It's very interesting that in Mahabharata Tatparya Nirnaya, once again I quote Madhvacharya because I am more familiar with the literature of Madhvacharya as giving new insights into the Adhyatmic interpretations of the classical texts. As I said, Kapali Shastri and Aurobindo have appreciated these Adhyatmic interpretations very much. And I quoted the Sanskrit quotation from the commentary of Kapali Shastri on Rigveda as to how he appreciates the Adhyatmic interpretations of Madhvacharya, and also the commentary on Rigbhashya by Raghavendra Tirtha giving this Adhyatmic interpretation. Anyway, those issues are already stated earlier. In Mahabharata Tatparya Nirnaya, I will read out the slokas instead of elaborating on their meanings. Manvadi kechit bruvate, hyastikadi tathapare, tatho uparicharadyanne, bharatam parichakshate. Then Dharmo bhaktyadi dashakaha, srutadihi shila vainao, sabrahmaka stute yatra manvadim tam vidurbudhaha. Bhaktir Jnanam Savairagyam Prajna Medha Sthitisthihi Yoga Prano Balam Chaiva Rukodara iti smritaha. Dharma stands for Bhaktyadi Dashakaha. Bhakti, Jnana, Vairagya, etc. And Rukodara, Bhimasena, stands for Bhakti Jnanam Savairagyam Prajna Medha Dhitistitihi. Etad Dashatmako Vayuhu Tasyad Bhimastadaatmakaha. Sarva Vidya Draupaditu Yasmat Saiva Saraswati Ajnanadi Swarupastu Kalir Duryodhana Smritaha Viparitantu Yajnanam Dushasana iti ritaha Nastikyam Chakunirnama Sarva Doshatmakah Pare Dhartarashtra Swahankaro Drauni Rudratmako Yataha. Like that, each character is considered as an icon of a value or morality principle of life. That's when we say, and in short, the Pandavas stand for the good thought processes and Kauravas stand for the bad thought processes, good forces and bad forces. So the entire Mahabharata is the fight between the goodness and the evil and the ultimate victory of the goodness. So the entire Mahabharata Yuddha has to be viewed as a fight between the good thoughts and the bad thoughts. In that sense, Mahabharata Yuddha was not fought in Kurukshetra in Haryana, but Mahabharata Yuddha takes place in the mind of everyone. Mind itself becomes the Kurukshetra, as a conflict between the good and the bad is always taking place in the mind. Viewed in this way, we can see how Bhagavad-Gita deals with this conflict of thoughts between the good and the bad. So, like that, we have the Adhyatmic interpretation of the characters. I also give one or two examples which have occurred to me in the course of my presentations of the Puranic stories. Take for instance the story of Dhruva. Dhruva is the son of Suniti and Uttama is the son of Suruchi. If we combine these two names, the names are also very important in the Puranas. Dhruva Suniti and Uttama Suruchi. Dhruva Suniti means firm faith in morality, firm faith in ethics, firm faith in values. So that means commitment to values stands for Dhruva Suniti. See the beauty of the names. The names are either acronyms or they represent certain values. Similarly, Uttama Suruchi, that means highest taste for worldly pleasures is Uttama Suruchi. That means the materialistic pleasures, the Bhautika Sampat and craze for it and complete commitment for it. So the story of Dhruva is essentially a fight between the commitment to morality and values and the ultimate commitment to pleasures, full involvement in the worldly pleasures, the materialism and spiritualism. As I mentioned, the man has to be considered as a combination, as a blend of materialism and spiritualism. Then only we get a holistic view of man's behavior. The modern economic science, modern management science consider man only as a materialistic animal. So all the goals of life, all the objectives of management, objectives of development are put in the materialistic framework. National income, foreign exchange earning, profits and earnings, shares, bazaars, so all these are put in the materialistic framework. Whereas the spiritualism gives a value-based underpinning for the materialistic benefits. Spiritualism leads us to different sets of goals of life. They imply commitment, contentment and satisfaction, caring for others, commitment to values and all these. Dharma, Artha, Kama, Moksha are the fourfold goals for the holistic man when conceived as a blend of materialism and spiritualism. So in that sense, a number of stories of Puranas become stories or certain sermons, certain episodes of the conflict between the materialism and spiritualism. Similarly, so as I said, the Dhruva story is a conflict between commitment to values and the commitment to worldly pleasures. And ultimate victory would be that of commitment to values. And similarly, the story of Prahlada can be considered as a conflict between material philosophy of life and excessive obsession about the material benefits and the commitment to spiritualism. Spiritualism of the highest order is giving to us the So Prahlada stands for contentment. Prahlada stands for total firmness on the spiritual principles of life. So Prahlada ultimately becomes victorious because the spiritual values always become superior to the materialistic values, materialistic approaches to life. So in this way, most of our literature of philosophy is not only telling us as to how we should realize knowledge for the ultimate goal of the final bliss, moksha, but they also tell us the philosophy of life as to how we should live. Now, the first sloka of Bhagavad-Gita, Dharmakshetra Kurukshetra samaveta yuyotsavaha mamaka pandavaschaiva kim akurvata sanjaya. That is a beginning telling us the basis, the foundation of narrating Bhagavad-Gita as a theory and practice of managing oneself. You know, the man considered in this holistic framework is having the conflict of thoughts between the good and the bad. Dharmakshetra Kurukshetra. Dharmakshetra stands for commitment to values and Kurukshetra stands for the commitment to materialism. So in this way, Dharmakshetra and Kurukshetra, this man is a blend of both Kurukshetra and Dharmakshetra. And now, Mamakaha Pandavaha. Mamakaha means the one who stand, the thought processes which stand for ahankara, myself, my own possession, materialism. Then Pandavaha are supposed to be the icons of good thoughts, good approaches, value-based approach to life. And Mamakaha Pandavaha Chaiva Kim Akurvata Sanjaya. So when the conflict takes place between the two forces, then whom we should approach for knowing which way the resolution takes place. We must approach Sanjaya, Samyak Jayati iti Sanjaya, our inner conscience. We must always take the help of inner conscience to know how the conflict between the good and the bad gets settled and should get settled. So that is how the first sloka itself gives us an insight into how Bhagavad-Gita could be treated as a treatise on human behavior. Now, we are told that Bhagavad-Gita is the Yoga Shastra. All the 18 adhyayas give us the yogas. Each adhyaya stands for one yoga. The first adhyaya for Vishada Yoga, the second adhyaya is Sankhya Yoga, and third adhyaya is Karma Yoga, like that. Jnana Yoga, Bhakti Yoga, Jnana Vijnana Yoga, then Atma Sanyama Yoga. All these are yogas. And as I mentioned, I rely on the beautiful succinct commentary of Sri Raghavendra Tirtha on Bhagavad-Gita, which tells us in a very objective manner the messages of Bhagavad-Gita as are relevant to our everyday life. He defines yoga etymologically as follows. He derives the meaning of yoga etymologically as follows. Yujyate phalam anena iti karana vyutpatya yogaha upayaparaha. Yujyate phalam anena iti karana vyutpatya yogaha upayaparaha. So yoga is upaya because it connects the phala with the instrumentality. And it gives the instrumentalities for realizing a certain goal. When we say Vyayama is a yoga, Pranayama is a yoga, Baba Ramdev's lessons on yoga abhyasa, on Anulom Vilom, Kapalabhati, Brahmri, all these, they are all instrumentalities for realizing better body health, better spiritual health, better mental health. So they are all the instrumentalities. In the same way, each yoga given in Bhagavad-Gita leads us to the realization of a particular type of behavior of the human entity. So they affect the behavior, and by telling us as to how combined this behavior, we get the knowledge about the managerial efficiency. So the present lecture is captioned as Yoga's Human Behavior and Managerial Efficiency. So in each adhyaya, one upaya or instrumentality is told. Yujyate phalam anena iti karana vyutpatya yogaha upayaparaha atra jnanopayaparaha. Now Vishada Yoga, the first adhyaya is called as Vishada Yoga. Vishada is the status of depression which Arjuna got in the beginning. So as I said, Bhagavad Gita also deals with the issues of conflict of interest, stress management, depression management, and so on. So Arjuna is depressed. Now again, Raghavendra Swamigalu gives a beautiful definition of Vishada. Moha nimittakat shokat and manodaurbhalyam yasmin sati sarva vyaparoparamaha bhavati saha vishadaha. Vishada is the status of depression. But the root cause for depression is moha, that is misunderstanding, misconception. Some ill-conceived notion about an event, about a person, about a matter, about a situation. So that gives us certain sadness. Moha nimittakat shokat. And that sadness leads to a certain weakness of the mind. When we are sad, we are not able to make full potential of the mind. Otherwise, mind has got tremendous capacity. Through mind, we can reach the moon, we can go to Mangalaloka, we can consider having been on the top of the Himalayas, or we can consider having reached the American continent. So mind is very powerful instrument for our thought processes. In fact, there is a saying, Mana eva manushyanam karanam bandha mokshayoho. Manas itself is the causal factor for bandha and moksha. But anyway, so manas becomes weak. When we are sad, when we are unable to have a proper sense of reasoning, then we become sad. So, shokat, moha nimittakat, shokat, and manodaurbhalya. Yasmin sati sarva vyaparoparamaha bhavati. All our activities, all our tendencies, all our initiatives get lost when the mind becomes weak. So it's a beautiful definition of Vishada. And Arjuna's Vishada was founded on a certain misconception about his own understanding. Both Arjuna and Duryodhana were facing the same situation. And Duryodhana was also depressed. He did not demonstrate his depression, but Arjuna, having demonstrated his depression, went to the advisor the perfect psychiatrist, Professor Lord Krishna, to give him the advice, to help him to remove the moha and shoka and manodaurbhalya. And he felt that his analysis was mistaken. There was some error in his analysis, and therefore he wanted to get a resolution of that misunderstanding by approaching a senior expert. Whereas Duryodhana did not do anything of that kind. He was also facing the same situation, but he decided things on his own. Duryodhana and Arjuna can be considered as two models of managers, two icons of managers, having responded to the same situation differently. That is what we find in everyday life. One responds to the situation in a particular way, and the other responds to the same situation in a different way. And who is a good manager, managing oneself, and who is a bad manager depends upon how the person has responded to the given situation. That is why Duryodhana, what did he do? When the whole thing was getting ready for Yuddha, Duryodhana saw the army of the Pandavas. Drishtva tu Pandavanikam Yudham Duryodhanastata Acharyam Upasangamya Raja Vachanam Abravid. Duryodhana's response to the given situation is characterized by the following characteristics. One, he makes his own decisions without consulting anybody. He could have consulted Vidura, he could have talked to Bhishmacharya, he could have spoken to Dronacharya, he could have himself seen the merit of what he is doing is correct or not. But he did not do that. He committed himself to a decision and wanted to implement that. And second characteristic of a bad manager is that he does not have faith in his own people. He approached Dronacharya and started asking him to defend Bhishmacharya and others, and asked all the warriors, all the chieftains, all the colonels and majors to protect Bhishmacharya because he is the only source of hope for us. And thirdly, he did not have faith in his own people. Now, see the beauty of Vedavyasa's composition. He says in the third sloka, Pachaitam Panduputranam Acharya Mahatim Chamum Yudham Drupadaputrena Tava Sishyena Dhimata. Some commentators have derived the message that Duryodhana did not have faith in his own people. The words in this sloka, Panduputranam Acharya, he calls Dronacharya as Panduputranam Acharya. Actually, the sloka runs as follows: Acharya Panduputranam Mahatim Etam Mahatim Chamum Pasya Drupadaputrena Tava Sishyena Dhimata Vyudham. You see this army which has been put in the Vyuhakara, huge army. Though his army was much bigger than the army of the Pandavas, he considered the army of the Pandavas as very huge and frightful. And also he says that it has been put in the Vyuhakara. He did not approach the Senapati of the Sainikas. Dhrittadumna was the Senapati. And Drupada Putrena Tava Sishyena Dhimata. So he asks Dronacharya to see that army put down in Vyuhakara by the Senapati of Pandavas, namely Dhrittadumna. And he says Panduputranam Acharya. He calls him as though he is the Acharya of Panduputras. Because Dronacharya had always favored the Pandavas. He wanted Arjuna to be a better archer than Duryodhana, and he had wanted Duryodhana to be an inferior Gada Yuddha expert than Bhima. So he had always shown preference to the Pandavas and Dronacharya for various reasons that are narrated in Mahabharata. And so he has no faith in his own people. And then he says, Dhrishtadyumna tava shishyena dhimata. And that Shishya, who is the Senapati of the Pandavas, is Dhiman. He has become very knowledgeable. And he has Drupada Putrena tava shishyena. He has put the army into Vyuhakara. So he has no faith in his own people. And then he says that aparyaptam balam tadasmakam balam bhishmabhirakshitam paryaptam tvedameti balam bhimabhirakshitam. He has no faith in his own capabilities. A person on the eve of the warfare or on the eve of the conflict resolution of the thought processes that come in him should have the confidence. He should not have the wavering approach to the resolutions of the conflicts. So he says, see, our Sainya, though protected by a great warrior like Bhishma, is not enough for us. And the Sainya, protected by a warrior like Bhima, is enough for them. So we will not be able to perhaps win the warfare. So he had always nourished a feeling of diffidence. So a bad manager does not have faith in his own people. He does not consult anybody, and he does not have the confidence or the courage of getting over the crisis situation. So whereas Arjuna, on seeing the armies, his relatives, he also did the analysis. He did not take the decisions on his own. The first Adhyaya, Vishada Yoga, gives us the analysis done by a detailed analysis done by Arjuna. But there was something wrong in his analysis. That is why, doubting his own analysis, he approached Lord Krishna as an advisor to him, in whom he had full faith. In whatever he prescribed, he wanted to implement. Whatever he prescribed, he would act on it. He would think about it, rethink about it. So Arjuna was a good manager because he analyzed the situation. He had a wrong notion of what he should be doing, but he approached Lord Krishna for advice, and ultimately he tried to correct himself with the basic premises of his analysis. So he says, Senayor ubhayor madhye ratham sthapaya me achyuta yavadetan niriksheham yodhu kaman avasthitan kairmaya sahayodhavyam asmin ranasamudyame yodhyamanan aveksheham ete atra samagataha dhartarashtrasya durbuddhehe yuddhe priyachikirshavaha senayoho ubhayoho madhye ratham sthapaya me achyuta. So a good manager wants to go in the middle of the two conflicting thought processes. Pandava Sainya stands for the thought processes of ethics and morality, and Kaurava Sainya stands for the forces of adharma, immorality, valuelessness, non-ethics, and so on. And we did not go into the elaboration of as to how or justification of these, but these are very well known and accepted and well documented in the Mahabharata, in the story of Mahabharata. And so a person who is a good manager has to abstract himself in the middle portion of the two conflicting thought processes. He should not take the course of one or the other. So he says, Ratham sthapaya me achyuta. I have discovered one interesting dimension of Arjuna addressing Krishna as Achyuta. You see, the same Achyuta as an address to Krishna comes towards the end. Ashto moha smritirlabdha tat prasadan maya Achyuta. Initially, he did not have a good understanding of the meaning of Achyuta. Achyuta means one who does not have chuti, who does not have destruction. Of course, Paramatma does not have destruction. He is supposed to be free from all the 4 types of destructions. Anityatvam, dehahanihi, dukkha praptihi, apurnata. These are called as Chaturvidha Nashas. Anityatva. Paramatma is not Anitya. He is Nitya. Similarly, Jivatma is also Nitya. But Jivatma has got the Nasha of Dehahani. He loses his Deha, goes from one Deha to the other. And Dukkha Prapti, he also experiences Dukkha. Whereas Paramatma, being Satchidananda Swarupa, does not have any Dukkha, any feeling of Ajnana or Dukkha or anxiety and so on. Anityam Dukkhani, Dukkha Prapti, Apurnata. Paramatma is supposed to be the icon of perfection in all attributes. He does not have anywhere any shortcoming in his good attributes. Anityatvam dukkhani, anityatvam deha praptihi, dehahanihi, dukkha praptihi, apurnata. So in this manner, Paramatma is perfect. And now he had doubt as to whether a person who does not have destruction about himself, leading the warfare and telling all of us to get ourselves destroyed, was something very fishy. So he used the word Achyuta in the beginning with a lot of less than clear meaning of the word Achyuta. But at the end of the Bhagavad-Gita, he came to know how Paramatma is great, Satchidananda Swarupa, Sarvaguna Paripurna, in Vibhuti Yoga, in Vishwarupa Darshana. All these dimensions give to him a clear understanding of Achyuta. So for the same reason, his moha is destroyed. Nashto mohaha smritir labdha. That is why the Arjuna was not very correct in taking a decision to give up the fight. And his analysis that all his relatives will be killed, and all his analysis of the industrial structure, choice of technology, choice of location of the industry, choice of the labor, choice of techniques of management, all these were wrong. He considered himself as very knowledgeable, but all these were wrong. And when he doubted about his own analysis, he approached Krishna for removing his moha. So the entire Bhagavad-Gita begins with Vishada Yoga, and yoga means instrumentality for making us realize a goal, a certain behavior. So the same situation induced Duryodhana in performing or responding in one particular way, whereas Arjuna responded in a totally different way. So he says, I want to see by remaining abstracted between the two opposite thought processes of good and bad. And then you are misleading us because you are Achyuta. So the same word Sambodhana of Achyuta, beginning in the beginning and coming in the beginning and also towards the end, is indicative of how the moha of Arjuna was removed by the Bhagavad-Gita message. And so he says he went to Krishna for advice. And Vishada Yoga also tells us about the modality of entire Bhagavad-Gita. In fact, moha, shoka, manodaurbhalya, and then finally not doing anything. So all these will have to be corrected from Arjuna's behavior. So Arjuna's behavior, it's a behavioral science, it is a psychology science. Arjuna is a psychiatric patient and Krishna is a psychiatric doctor. And so he systematically starts moving step by step. The entire Bhagavad Gita can be summed up by these processes. One is the removal of moha, misunderstanding. Many times in life we feel depressed. Why? Because we have misunderstanding of somebody else. If suppose X comes and tells you that Y was telling against you to your boss, or in the house the second daughter-in-law goes and tells the parents-in-law that the X said, or that she said about it like this. Or among the friends, X said something about you, and you believe that, and that makes you sad, and that makes you lose the weakness of the mind, gets you into weakness of the mind, and makes you further lose your full potential of the mind. So in everyday life also, Vishada, it's a beautiful definition of the status of depression. Moha nimittakat, shokat, yan manodaurbhalyam, yasmin sati sarva vyaparopara bhavati, saha vishadaha. So Rayaru gives these etymological meanings very beautifully. As I said about yoga, yujjate phalam. Yoga comes from the word root yuja, to bring sambandha. What are the two things between which the sambandha is explained here? One is the instrumentality and the other is the result. As I said, Baba Ramdev's Vyayama or Pranayama and all other yoga abhyasas are instrumentalities for realizing better health condition, both mental health and also body health. That's what he always argues. But here, all the yogas generate a certain behavioral pattern. Yogas tell you as to what could be the behavioral pattern. So now the model of analysis of Arjuna was also partial. As Duryodhana's model was totally wrong and totally incomplete and totally erroneous, Arjuna's model was better, but it was having the weakness. It had got the blemish of not telling Arjuna about his duty. That was the starting point for Bhagavad-Gita. The moha, and the mohas are what? Various types of mohas. He thought that his relatives will be killed and the entire dharma would be destroyed, and all these arguments which he gives for him to take the decision not to fight, Gandiva Dhanus keeping and not expressing his eva muktva arjuna sankhe rathopasthaupa visata visrijya sacharam chapam choka samvigna manasaha. So he left the Gandiva Dhanus and sat inside the ratha. Rathopasthaha is, Rayaru gives the meaning as ratha madhye, not outside the ratha. That's what many pictures show. Arjuna sitting outside and Krishna getting down from the ratha. No, it happens both inside the ratha itself. Arjuna comes down from his seat, keeps his Gandiva Dhanus, and Krishna turns backwards from his seat of the driver, the Sarathi, and starts addressing him. They are all very close to each other. And many times perhaps he puts his shoulder around Arjuna and cajoles him and pacifies him and props him up to do the right things. So that is why the Arjuna Vishada Yoga, some scholars, I don't want to name them, have asked how Vishada can be a yoga, an instrumentality for Jnanopaya. Unless there is Vishada, you will not be prompted to move to an advisor. In fact, technically, there are supposed to be 3 types of anukulyas. For any grantha, any Shastra grantha to become pramana, there are 3 types of anukulyas. One is Shrotranukulya, Prasanganukulya, and Vaktranukulya. Or Vaktranukulya, Shrotranukulya, and Prasanganukulya. You can take the 3 anukulyas. Anukulyas means the contextual correctness, contextual properness. then Vaktranukulya. The person who tells something to you has to be a good person. That Anukulya has to be there. If he is a cheater, as they say in philosophy, Nadi tire panchaphalani santi, a cheater comes and tells you that on the bank of a river there are 5 fruits, but you go there and you will not find the 5 fruits, and he is a cheater. So such a Vakta will not be relied upon. Vedavyasa is Lord's incarnation. He is a reliable Vakta. Krishna himself is the Vakta here, preacher to Arjuna, so he is the most reliable person. That is why the entire Bhagavad-Gita becomes a treatise of great authentic knowledge, authenticity. And Srotranukulya. Arjuna himself stands for Sravana, Sravana Rupa Bhakti. Sravana is supposed to be major instrumentality for acquiring knowledge. In Brahmasutra Bhashya, Madhvacharya tells as to how there are 4 components for acquiring knowledge. Sravanam mananam chaiva, dhyanam bhaktihi tathaivacha, sadhanam jnana sampattu, pradhanam nanyadrishyati. A beautiful, succinct. All the acharyas have given the meanings of different words, different situations in a very succinct manner. I quote Madhvacharya because I am more familiar with that literature. And so he says, Sravanam mananam chaiva. First step for acquiring knowledge has to be Sravana. It has to be listening. Listening is very important. That is why the entire Vedas have come through Sravana only. Sravana medium. Sravana is an important source for acquiring knowledge. In fact, the Vedas are called as Shruti because they have come down to us by Sravana. And the Vedastu Nitya Vinnatvat, Shrutayas Chakhilay Shrutayhe, Amnayas Panannatha Pathat, Isha Buddhi Sthita Sada. The Vedas are called as Vedas because they give knowledge, Vidadjnane. And they are Shrutayaha because they have come from the source of listening. The listening was such a great thing, We should be feeling extremely amazed as to how the entire texts of Vedas have come down to us as a result of these listening process. From one to the Guru to Shishya. Even now, on the Gokarna side, on various Sishyas of Kanchimatham and various scholars, particularly the Advaita scholars, have retained the Vedic recitation and Vedic knowledge to a much, the text Sanhita, to a much greater extent. I had met a student from Gokarna when I was Chancellor of Sarashtra Sanskrit Vidyapit, Tirupati, had come to Delhi, and he could quote the Rigveda from any situation. You can ask just one line and he would start reciting the entire Rig. And you tell the Rig and he will tell you where it is. Fantastic mastery over the vast literature of Rigveda. So the mind has got the capability of retaining knowledge, and we must recognize the role of the mind in giving us knowledge. And so the Sravanam Mananam, then after you listen to the lectures by the preacher, by the teacher, by the guru, you must do the manana, then reflect upon it. Sravanam Mananam Chaiva, Dhyanam, and then you should meditate over it. You must ruminate over it. You must repeat again and again what is stated. Dhyanam, Bhakti. In all these processes, you must have great devotion, great commitment, great faith. Without faith, you don't get any knowledge. If you are sitting in a classroom and if you have no faith that the teacher is capable of teaching you, and if you have no faith in the Vedavyasa, if you have no faith in your gurus, then you will not be able to get the knowledge. So Sravana, Manana, Dhyana and Bhakti. These are supposed to be 4 great instrumentalities for acquiring knowledge. Similarly, in Navavidha Bhakti, which Prahlad Raja preached to Hiranyakashipu, Sravanam Kirtanam Vishnoho, Smaranam Padasevanam, Archanam Vandanam Dasyan, Sakhyam Atmanivedanam. All these 9 types of bhaktis are important for showing our commitment to the Lord. So here, coming to the present situation, the Sravana is a very important instrumentality for acquiring knowledge. And Vishada came because Arjuna had forgotten about the moralities, and he forgotten about his duties, and he only depended upon and he'd forgotten. That's why he says later on, Ashto mohaha smritir labdha. He says, now I am remembering what is right, what should be done, etc. Tvat prasadan maya achyuta. There also he calls him as Achyuta. Now another dimension which I want to mention in human behavior in Bhagavad-Gita is the way in which each one addresses the other. In the normal relationships between man and man, man and woman, man and woman, etc., man means man and woman together. So we find the way in which each one addresses the other person becomes very important. The words here, the word Achyuta I saw very important. Then in the same way, we find a number of situations where the words that are used to do the Sambodhana become very important. I will tell more about that and see how human behavior is certain principles, certain tips for optimum human behavior. In an office, if you call your subordinate by his name, he would be very happy. At home, if you call your son by the proper affectionate name, he will be happy. Your colleague, or in the neighborhood, if you address the people by the proper names, bahut acha hai, something then that becomes very palatable, and so on. So another one principle of human behavior, as I said, Bhagavad-Gita is a treatise on telling you about human behavior, and in that sense, here we find that many tips are given here by using proper words. Krishna, Arjuna addresses Krishna as Madhusudana, Arisudana, Arjuna, Parantapa. I will tell about that in the next. So the second adhyaya onwards, the entire Bhagavad Gita, the entire message of Bhagavad Gita begins. The first step, as I said, is to remove the misunderstanding. And Krishna moves in a very systematic manner to remove the misunderstanding of Arjuna. And in the first part, the misunderstandings where he had no knowledge about the nature of Paramatma, the nature of Jivatma, and he thought that by the Kauravas being killed, he becomes very sorry, and he did not know that this Deha, if it is given up, he will get another Deha. And he thought that Sukha and Dukkha come as a result of the contact of the sense organs with the objects. No. Contact of the sense organs with the objects combined with Abhimana, that is mine, my things. We see on the television a number of people killed, accidents taking place. We don't cry like those who are relatives, who feel that their own people are killed. So that's why Abhimana is required for Sukha and Dukkha. Matra sparshastu kaunteya sitoshna sukha dukkhadaha agama apayano anityaha tamstitikshasva bharata. So telling about the nature of Jivatma, nature of Paramatma, the sources of Sukha and Dukkha, and the fact that Marana is nothing but changing the body from one to the other, and one need not. So Krishna first removes these small misconceptions, and first he wants Arjuna to surrender to him. After he has surrendered, he starts removing Sishyasteham Shadhimam Tvam Prapannam. So that again is another issue, another item of advice on the management. On the manager should have sound advisors, and he should totally surrender to them. He should not take decisions on his own. That's why the consultations, parliamentary consultations, consultative bodies and advisors in each ministry and in each corporate sector, and even at home, advisors in the form of elders and guidance from the elders, all these are required for optimum efficiency in human behavior. We'll stop here. Yatra Yogeshwarah Krishno, Yatra Partho Dhanurdharaha, Tatra Sri Vijayo Bhutihi, Dhruva Netirmatirmama, Sri Krishna Arpanamastu.